What would you do if a flight attendant threw away your bag without a word just because of how you looked? Now imagine you calmly pull out your phone and reveal that your name is on the aircraft's lease. This isn't just a story about racism on a plane. It's a story about a man named Camden Wells, a quiet CEO who didn't fight fire with fire. He used silence, presence, and truth. And what happened next? It shook the airline industry to its core. But who is Camden, really? Why did he refuse to speak up when they humiliated him mid-flight? Why did he walk away from the spotlight, only to return years later at Gate 17A? And what was the one sentence he said in front of Congress that changed everything? This story will challenge how you think about power, dignity, and the cost of silence. Every detail from the seat assignments to a child's sticky fingers carries weight. You won't believe how it ends. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because what you're about to hear might just stay with you long after the seatbelt sign goes off. Now, let's begin. The terminal hummed with life, the kind of quiet chaos that only an international airport could master. Announcements crackled from overhead speakers. Children whined in strollers. A businessman muttered into his Bluetooth headset while juggling a tray of coffee and a briefcase. Somewhere near Gate 27, a small dog barked twice from its carrier. No one flinched. Camden Wells stood still amid the noise. He didn't need to rush. He was always early, and he knew the value of silence. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a composed presence. People rarely looked twice at him, and he preferred it that way. His clothes were clean and simple charcoal jeans, a soft navy sweater, polished boots. No brand screamed for attention, only the quiet glint of a silver watch, worn under his sleeve, whispered of something more. Camden looked out the window across the tarmac. Flight 1813, bound for Munich via New York, sat ready at the gate, its engines quiet, its fuselage reflecting the overcast sky. The plane was a Boeing 737, one of the newer models. He knew it well. In fact, he knew most of the jets in the fleet, because his company Veritas AeroCorp leased them. Camden had spent over a decade building that business from the ground up. It started in a small office in Baltimore with 2 laptops, a whiteboard, and a vision. Now, his signature appeared on multi-million-dollar lease agreements that kept international airlines afloat. But you wouldn't know it from the way he moved through airports. He traveled without assistance, no entourage, no first-class demands. He liked to walk among people, to feel the air of public space, to see how crews behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Today, Camden was flying to New York for a connection before his Munich meeting. It was a final negotiation with Luft Stratos, one of the largest European carriers. The contract was crucial, but his thoughts weren't about power or profit this morning. They were on his father, just yesterday. Camden had visited the assisted living home in Annapolis. His father had once been an air traffic controller, disciplined, sharp, and full of sky stories. Now, dementia was erasing those memories like chalk in the rain. Camden sat with him for hours, holding his hand as he muttered half-finished sentences about radar screens and tail numbers. "You still love planes, son?" he'd asked suddenly, clear for just a second. "I never stopped," Camden replied. Now at Gate 27, that memory lingered, a gentle ache behind his ribs. He took a sip from his reusable bottle and glanced around. Families, students, a woman with a hijab reading a paperback, an older man with a service dog, people of all backgrounds, all going somewhere. Camden liked that. Boarding began shortly after. First class, active military, then Groups 1 and 2. Camden was in Group 2, not because he lacked status, but because he chose not to use it. He moved with calm steps toward the jet bridge, Boarding pass already scanned, shoulders relaxed. "Good morning and welcome aboard," said a young flight attendant at the door. Her smile was soft, genuine. Her name tag read, Kayla. Camden nodded. "Thank you." The aisle was narrow as always. Camden had seat 9D aisle, right side. As he passed rows of passengers settling in, he caught small glances, a mother opening snacks for her toddler, a man arguing with a coworker on speakerphone, completely unaware of his volume. When Camden reached his seat, he noticed the overhead bin was nearly full, but there was space a few feet ahead, just enough for his single carry-on roller. He lifted it easily, muscles long since trained by years of travel. It slid into place with a satisfying thump. He sat down and exhaled slowly, resting his hands on his knees. The plane smelled like recycled air and faint citrus cleaner. He adjusted the air nozzle overhead and leaned back. A moment later, he felt a presence. He looked up. A flight attendant stood there, arms crossed. Her uniform neat, her posture rigid. A certain practiced smile sat on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sir," she said, "that bag may need to be checked." Her name tag read, Darlene Marsh. Camden looked at her calmly. "It's a standard carry-on," he said, voice low, measured. "I fly with it often." Darlene's eyes flicked over him, his skin, his clothes, his row number. "It's large," she replied flatly, "and the bin is nearly full. I placed it where there was space," he said, his tone still polite. "But if there's an issue, I'm happy to move it to another bin. Just not check it. It holds sensitive equipment." Something in her expression changed just slightly. "Please don't make this difficult," she said, louder this time. Passengers nearby looked up. Camden blinked slowly. "I'm not trying to be," he replied, just offering a solution. Darlene's lips tightened. She stepped back without another word and moved on. Camden exhaled again. Not deeply. Just enough to release the tension coiled in his chest. He didn't know yet that this wasn't the last time he would see her face that day, or that she was about to do something far worse to someone else, something that would turn a quiet flight into a national headline. But for now, Camden simply reached into his backpack, pulled out a worn paperback copy of Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and started to read. The terminal was far behind, but the confrontation, it was just beginning. Camden closed the book after 3 pages. It was hard to focus, not because the writing wasn't good, it was brilliant, but because something about that brief exchange with the flight attendant had unsettled him. He couldn't quite name it yet. It wasn't the words, it was the eyes, the flicker of presumption behind them, the practiced authority, the way she'd said, "Please don't make this difficult," like she had already decided he would. He wasn't new to that tone. He'd heard it in boardrooms, at valet stands, and once, infamously, at a fundraiser where someone handed him their car keys. Assumptions had a way of showing up in plain sight when people weren't paying attention. He leaned his head back against the seat and took a slow breath. "Let it go," he told himself. "Don't start counting battles again." Across the aisle, a young woman in a brown cable-knit sweater struggled with her over-ear headphones. A few rows up, a white man with a loud voice was joking about taking the wrong edible before flying. The smell of over-sweetened cologne lingered from someone in a middle seat. Normal flight chaos. Camden glanced up. Darlene was back. Not at his row, but across the aisle, helping a couple rearrange their items to fit a duffel and 2 backpacks in the overhead bin. Her tone was brisk, but neutral. Camden watched her interact with them. There was no hint of irritation. She even laughed once. The same woman who had addressed him like a potential problem just minutes ago. Interesting. He didn't want to assume the worst. He really didn't. But his gut was rarely wrong. Something in her had tightened when she saw him, not because of his bag, but because of who she thought he was. "Excuse me," said a voice beside him. A man, maybe in his late 20s, stood in the aisle. He had warm brown skin, tightly braided hair, and wire-rimmed glasses. His clothes were simple black jeans, a hoodie with a band logo, and a denim jacket. He smiled politely and gestured toward the window seat. "I'm 9F. Camden stood to let him through. The man sat down, carefully placing a soft black duffel bag at his feet. "Thanks, man. No problem." Camden returned to his seat. "I'm Ezra," the man said, extending a hand. "Camden?" They shook, heading to New York, or connecting, Ezra asked. "Connecting to Munich. Nice. Germany. I'm headed to Amsterdam, then Ghent. Gig coming up." Camden raised an eyebrow. "Musician. Yeah. Jazz. Saxophone. That's no small thing. Europe loves jazz." Ezra grinned. "They do. I was lucky to get picked for this showcase. Been dreaming of it since high school." Camden smiled. There was an honesty in his voice, the kind of joy you couldn't fake. Darlene passed by again. Ezra looked up to greet her, but she didn't make eye contact. Boarding continued, slow and steady. A few passengers argued about who had Group 3. Someone dropped a phone under their seat and cursed softly. A child cried once, then was soothed. Eventually, the plane was full. The doors were closed. The engines hummed beneath them. And then, almost like clockwork, there was motion in the aisle. Darlene again. This time, she stopped directly at Camden and Ezra's row. She pointed toward the black duffel bag. "Whose is that?" Ezra looked down. "That's mine. It needs to go in the overhead," Darlene said flatly. Ezra nodded and reached down. "No problem. I'll fit it up." He stood, opened the bin above, and tried to shift some bags to make room. Darlene hovered. "There's no space," she announced. "I can angle it," Ezra said. "It's soft, sir. It's oversized," she replied curtly. Camden looked up. That wasn't true. He had seen much larger roller bags already placed without comment. Ezra glanced at Camden, unsure. "It's a personal item," Ezra said. "I fly with it all the time." "Fits fine." Darlene's jaw clenched. "It's too big. I'll have to take it." Without waiting, she reached for the bag. "Wait," Ezra said, trying to hold onto the strap. "It's got my laptop. My passport, please. Let me just shift things around." "You're holding up departure," she snapped. Passengers turned their heads. Ezra hesitated. His grip on the bag loosened. This is important to me," he said, quieter now. Camden saw it in his eyes, that flash of helplessness, the familiar calculation: comply and minimize the damage, or push back and risk escalation. Darlene yanked the bag gently from his hands. "I'll store it up front," she said without eye contact. "You'll get it back after landing." Then she turned and walked away. The duffel held like a grocery sack. Camden and Ezra looked at each other. "Man," Ezra whispered, shaking his head. "I hate when stuff like that happens." Camden didn't speak for a moment. He thought about his father again, about dignity, about the line between inconvenience and disrespect. "You okay?" he finally asked. Ezra nodded slowly. Yeah. But Camden could feel the shift, the quiet ripple of something unjust, left untouched. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demo played. Darlene's voice over the intercom was calm and pleasant again. The passengers relaxed. But Camden didn't, because something told him that bag wasn't going up front. He had watched her walk toward the galley, not the storage closet, and he had seen the tilt of her head, the stiffness in her shoulders. She wasn't storing the bag. She was getting rid of it. Camden leaned slightly into the aisle. He looked down toward the front. He could just barely see her silhouette. And then she dropped something into a large trash bag. His heart dropped. He sat back in his seat, stunned. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But it was. He had seen the top of Ezra's duffel, the black canvas, the silver zipper. There was no mistake. Darlene had thrown it away. Camden turned to Ezra, who was looking out the window, unaware. The seatbelt sign had just turned on. The flight attendants were making their last checks. And now Camden faced a decision. Say nothing and let the moment pass. Pretend it was a mistake. Let Ezra deal with the fallout later. Or speak. Reveal what he'd seen. Expose Darlene, here and now. He closed his eyes for a breath, not to decide, but to steady himself, because the answer was already inside him. And soon, the cabin would know too. Camden's heart beat slowly but with weight. Each thump marked a turning point, not in the flight, but in himself. He had seen what he had seen, Ezra's duffel tossed into a garbage bag with the same indifference someone might give to a fast food wrapper. There was no mistake, no illusion, and no reason left to stay silent. He reached up, pressed the call button above his seat, and leaned back calmly. Ezra looked over. "You good, man?" Camden nodded, voice steady. "Just need to speak to the flight crew for a moment." The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft rose above the clouds. But inside Camden, something had just started to burn. Not fire, not anger, but heat. The slow warmth of conviction. Darlene appeared a moment later, composed, as if nothing had happened. "Did you need something?" Sir Camden tilted his head slightly. "Could you please confirm where you placed the black duffel bag that was taken from this row?" Darlene's smile tightened. "As I stated earlier, sir, I stored it in the front compartment per FAA guidelines. May I ask where exactly that compartment is located?" Camden said, his tone polite but precise. Her pause was barely half a second. "It's a locked crew storage area." Camden nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'd like to confirm that with the captain." Darlene blinked. A shift, almost imperceptible, crossed her face. Her lips parted, then pressed together again. "I'm not sure that's necessary," she said. "The item is secure. You'll receive it upon landing." Camden spoke evenly. "Unfortunately, I witnessed you place it in a garbage bag at the front of the cabin. You did not enter any secure compartment." The air between them thickened. "Sir," she said, now clearly uncomfortable, "I assure you that's not what happened." "Then I'm sure the captain will have no issue checking with me," Camden replied, pressing the call button again, deliberately this time. Ezra sat still, now alert, watching the exchange. Passengers nearby were turning their heads, quiet but attentive. Darlene looked toward the galley, then back at Camden. "We're mid-flight. Please do not cause a disruption." Camden didn't flinch. "I'm not disrupting. I'm asking for clarity and accountability." Her voice dropped lower. "If this becomes an incident, it will reflect poorly on you." Camden blinked once. "On me." Darlene shifted, clearly rattled now. "We ask all passengers to remain calm and cooperative. I'll ask my colleague to assist you shortly." She turned and left, shoulders stiffer than before. Ezra leaned over. "Did you really see her do that?" Camden looked at him and nodded once. "I did." Ezra exhaled, long and heavy. "Damn, that bag. It's got my passport. My saxophone reeds, my grandmother's rosary." Camden felt a quiet pain at those words. A musician without his tools, a grandson without his anchor, all discarded in one silent act of power. Moments later, a younger flight attendant appeared, Kayla, nervous but kind-faced. She had clearly been briefed, and her voice was soft. Hi, my name is Kayla. I understand there's been some concern about a personal item. Camden turned to her. Yes. My seatmate's bag was taken by your lead attendant. I observed her disposing of it in a garbage bag in the galley. I'd like to speak to the captain to document the incident. Kayla blinked, stunned. In a garbage bag? Yes, Camden said. And I don't believe that qualifies as secure storage. She nodded slowly, her composure cracking a little. I'll notify the captain. Camden nodded. Thank you. As she walked away, Camden noticed more heads turning. The ripple was spreading. Not noise, not disruption, just attention. The kind of quiet alertness that precedes a storm. Ezra spoke again, softly. You didn't have to do that, but thank you. Camden looked at him and gave a faint smile. Sometimes silence is too expensive. Ezra chuckled under his breath, but there was no humor in it, only fatigue. You ever get tired of it, he asked, having to see it, name it, handle it, all the time. Camden answered, but tired doesn't mean finished. Minutes passed. The captain didn't emerge, but Kayla returned, more composed now. Sir, the captain has been notified of your report and will document the concern officially. He's asked me to reassure you that the bag will be located and reviewed upon landing. That's not enough, Camden said, gently but firmly. This was not a lost item. It was discarded by a member of the crew. I request that it be retrieved now. Kayla hesitated. Sir, the flight is at cruising altitude, and the bag is not in a pressurized compartment. It's in a soft garbage bin under no security. Every minute it sits there, the damage escalates. Would you mind confirming whether it's still there? Kayla swallowed. Give me a moment. She left again. This time. Darlene returned. She stood stiffly in the aisle, her voice louder than needed. Sir, I have already addressed this situation. Your continued insistence is bordering on harassment. Camden remained seated. I have not raised my voice. I've not left my seat. I've made a calm, documented request for transparency. What you're describing is not harassment, it's accountability. A woman 2 rows back spoke up. Excuse me. I saw her take the bag. That young man said it was important. I don't know why it wasn't just stored like the others. Another man added. I saw her toss it into the bin too. She didn't even hesitate. More murmurs now. Passengers who hadn't spoken were suddenly remembering what they saw. Camden didn't look around. He didn't need to. The truth was no longer his alone. Darlene's cheeks flushed. She turned and walked away, fast. Ezra stared ahead, blinking slowly. I don't even know what to feel. Camden said nothing at first. Then softly, feel whatever you need to feel, but know this, it's not your shame to carry. A few moments later, Kayla returned again, visibly tense. Sir, we located the bag. It was in a waste container, but it's intact. We've moved it to secure storage. Ezra sat up. Can I see it? Not until landing. I'm afraid, she said, clearly ashamed. Camden looked at her. Tell the captain I appreciate the response, but this does not end with retrieval. Kayla nodded. Understood. As she left, Ezra leaned back in his seat. He rubbed his eyes. They really threw it away, like it was nothing. Camden didn't respond immediately. He looked out the window. The sky was dark, scattered with stars. No, he finally said. They threw away something they didn't recognize. But that's on them. You know what it meant. That's what matters. Ezra turned to him. What do you do like in life? Camden smiled faintly. Commercial leases, private aviation mostly. Ezra laughed softly. No wonder you're so calm. You've seen worse. Camden thought about it. Yes, he had seen worse. But today wasn't about what he had seen. It was about what he had chosen not to ignore. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow as the flight settled into its long, cruising stretch. A gentle hush blanketed the passengers, but beneath that quiet, a slow, undeniable ripple moved through the cabin. Whispers, glances. A tension that had once been subtle was now impossible to ignore. Camden didn't need to raise his voice. He never did. His silence had already spoken volumes. And now, the moment had come to speak plainly. Kayla returned again, this time holding a small folder. She crouched down at Camden's seat. "Mr. Wells," she said in a whisper. Her tone changed from professional to personal. "The captain has asked if there's anything else he should prepare for upon landing." Camden looked at her for a long second. His voice remained calm. "Yes. He should prepare a statement for legal review, and he should be aware this flight is operating under a lease agreement that includes full conduct clauses for staff, including grounds for termination." Kayla's breath caught slightly. I'm not sure I follow." Camden reached slowly into his briefcase and pulled out a slim leather folder. He opened it gently, revealing a document with 3 signatures and a stamped seal. He pointed to a name near the bottom. "This aircraft," he said softly, "is part of a charter lease held by Belridge Holdings." Kayla blinked, confused. "I don't understand." He looked at her gently. "Belridge Holdings is my company." The silence between them deepened. Kayla stared at him, speechless. Camden allowed a full 10 seconds to pass before he continued, softly. "I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm not interested in theatrics. But what happened to that young man's bag was not a mistake. It was a message, and I need the airline to know I received it, loud and clear." Her face drained. She slowly rose to her feet, clutching the folder like it might slip through her hands. "I'll inform the captain," she murmured. "Thank you," Camden replied. "Please do." As Kayla walked toward the front, visibly shaken, Ezra turned in his seat, still wide-eyed. "What just happened?" he asked. Camden looked down at the seat in front of him, then back to Ezra. "I told them the truth," he said, "that I'm not just another passenger." "You own the plane?" Ezra asked, incredulous. Camden shook his head. "Not exactly. I lease a portion of the fleet. This jet included, through a company I built, quietly." Ezra let out a soft laugh. It wasn't mockery. It was disbelief tinged with respect. "You've been sitting here letting her treat you like that, and you could have shut it all down." "I could have," Camden replied, "but if I had, they would have turned it into a power play. A rich man throwing his weight around. I needed them to reveal themselves first." Ezra looked out the window, shaking his head. "You let them show who they really are." "Exactly," Camden said. They sat in silence for a while. The cabin was quiet now, almost reverent. A few passengers glanced over with new understanding. One man mouthed "thank you" as he passed on the way to the restroom. Another woman softly handed Ezra a pack of tissues and a small wrapped cookie. Camden noticed the gestures, small acts, but powerful. Sometimes people needed someone else to break the silence before they could add their voice. A new voice crackled over the PA system. It was calm, but carried a note of formality. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We appreciate your patience and cooperation this evening. We've been made aware of a situation concerning one of our passengers' belongings, and I'd like to reassure everyone that we are reviewing the matter thoroughly. If anyone would like to provide a statement upon landing, please let a crew member know. Thank you for your understanding." Ezra blinked slowly. "They're rattled." Camden nodded. They should be. He looked at Ezra again. You were willing to let it slide, weren't you? Ezra's voice cracked, low and hoarse. Yeah, I've let worse go. You learn to protect your peace. You know I do, Camden said. But there's a line. Ezra nodded. This time, it was my bag. Next time, it's someone's kid, or their medication, or their whole sense of safety. He closed his eyes for a second. Funny thing is, I almost apologized. When she snatched my bag, I had this instinct to say sorry for being in her way. Camden looked at him, eyes gentle. That's what they expect. That's the quiet they've grown comfortable with. Ezra turned in his seat and studied him. You said your company leases planes. Camden nodded. And you ride coach. Camden smiled faintly. I fly where the noise is, not above it. Ezra smiled, but it was soft and sad. You ever get tired of being the only one who sees the fire before it spreads? Camden nodded slowly. Yes. But I've learned that even one calm voice can put a wall between a spark and a flame. The cabin lights shifted again, a soft signal that the plane was beginning its descent. A voice overhead announced they'd be landing in 30 minutes. Darlene hadn't returned since the last confrontation. Camden suspected she was staying out of view. Perhaps she was being coached. Perhaps she was documenting her version of events. It didn't matter. The truth was already taking root. As the descent began, a woman in her 60s across the aisle leaned over to Camden. You handled that with dignity, she said quietly. My father would have been proud to see someone stand firm like that. Camden nodded. Thank you. Ezra looked at her and smiled. We're not used to people believing us, she replied. Some of us always have. We were just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. Camden glanced out the window again. The city lights began to flicker below, glowing like clusters of tiny suns. He felt a strange sense of peace, not victory, not revenge, just truth. That was all he ever wanted to preserve. The seatbelt sign chimed on as Camden fastened his belt. Ezra leaned closer. What's going to happen to her? Darlene Camden shrugged slightly. That's not up to me. But whatever happens, she'll remember tonight. Yeah, Ezra said. Me too. Camden turned toward him. What are you flying to? Ezra answered. L.A. Audition. I played jazz. Saxophone. Camden smiled. Good. Play it like it matters. Because it does. Ezra nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Camden. Not just for the bag, for not letting me feel small. Camden's voice was calm. You were never small. You were just quiet, and I had the privilege of hearing you. The plane dropped slightly in altitude. The hum of engines deepened. The cabin tilted gently into its final approach. Outside, Los Angeles glowed like a constellation. Inside, something else was lighting up too. Something powerful, something unspoken, something permanent. The wheels touched down with a thud that felt heavier than usual. For Camden, the descent wasn't just about altitude. It was about everything that had surfaced during the last 5 hours in the air. The quiet glances, the deliberate choices, the confrontation that had revealed more than anyone expected. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, the usual rustle of coats and clinking seatbelts began. But this time, it felt like everyone was moving more carefully, as if the gravity of what had happened had settled over them. Ezra didn't move. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes locked on the seat in front of him. You all right? Camden asked softly. Ezra nodded slowly. Yeah, just thinking. About everything I didn't say. You said enough, Camden replied. Sometimes silence is the sharpest thing in the room. They both stood when the overhead light blinked off and the door clicked open. Passengers exited row by row. Camden noticed a few whispered words between people who had never spoken to one another before this flight. A woman who had kept her head down now stopped beside Ezra, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I saw everything. You didn't deserve that. I hope someone actually listens." Ezra looked up, surprised. "Thank you." Her voice trembled. "It's happened to my son, too. He's only 12. Ezra opened his mouth, but she was already walking down the aisle, wiping her cheek discreetly. Camden motioned for Ezra to follow him. "Come on, let's walk together." At the aircraft door stood Kayla, eyes red but composed. She straightened her posture as they approached. "Mr. Wells," she said quietly, "I want to thank you. I didn't see it clearly until you spoke up, but I do now." Camden nodded. "You saw enough. That's what matters." She glanced at Ezra. "I'm sorry, truly." Ezra offered her a small, tired smile. "Me too. For how often people like me get treated like baggage." Kayla winced but accepted the weight of it. She stepped aside. The two men stepped into the jet bridge. It was cold, oddly sterile after the emotional warmth and intensity of the flight. But what hit them next wasn't the air. It was the flash. Cameras. At least 3 reporters stood at the terminal gate, phones held high, questions already forming on their lips. Behind them were a few curious travelers, whispering and trying to figure out what had happened. Camden paused, then turned slightly toward Ezra. "You good?" Ezra hesitated. "I've never been on the news." "You don't have to speak," Camden offered. "But they'll be looking at you either way." Ezra nodded slowly. "Let's walk through it. Quietly." The reporters called out. "Sir, are you Camden Wells? Did you file a complaint? Was there an incident involving racial profiling on the plane?" Camden didn't break stride. He simply walked past them, head upright, eyes forward. Ezra followed close beside him, still absorbing the sudden shift in attention. But the cameras didn't follow them all the way. Instead, one journalist turned and walked briskly in another direction toward the airline's service desk. Camden didn't need to hear it to know what would happen next. This wasn't just a passenger story anymore. It was a corporate one. A story about power, silence, and what happened when the right person quietly said, "Enough." As they reached the quieter end of the terminal, Camden stopped and turned to Ezra. "You need a ride." Ezra gave a small laugh. "Honestly, I was gonna take the train to my cousin's place in Long Beach." Camden reached into his coat pocket and handed him a card. "Call this number. There's a driver waiting. He'll take you anywhere you want to go." Ezra looked down at the card. Wells Transportation. "It's one of our branches," Camden said. Ezra blinked. "You really built all this?" "Yes, quietly. Over 15 years. No investors. Just long nights and a promise I made to my mother that I'd build something that couldn't be taken away from us." Ezra's voice lowered. "She must be proud." Camden nodded. "She passed 4 years ago, but I believe she saw enough." There was a pause. Then Ezra asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since Camden revealed his truth. "Why didn't you speak sooner? Why let it go as far as it did?" Camden looked him in the eye. "Because I needed you to see it too. I needed you to know that it wasn't just happening to you. It happens to all of us. And sometimes the only way to make others feel it is to let it sting in public." Ezra nodded slowly. "So you waited." "I waited for the moment when truth would matter more than my pride," Camden said. Ezra let the words settle. Then he asked, "What happens now?" Camden looked out the window at the glowing skyline. "I don't know yet, but I'm not done, and neither are you." He turned to him. "You still playing tomorrow?" Ezra lit up. "Yeah. There's this underground jazz bar near Venice. They're giving me a solo." Camden reached into his wallet and pulled out a slim black card. "Tell them to add your name to the playbill. I'll be in the front row." Ezra took the card like it was something precious. "I didn't expect any of this." "I didn't either," Camden said, "but we're here now." A moment passed. "You ever wonder," Ezra asked softly, "what would have happened if no one had said anything?" Camden's voice lowered to a whisper. "I used to, but I stopped wondering, because I decided I'd be the one to speak." Ezra held the card in one hand, his carry-on in the other. Then he did something Camden didn't expect. He pulled the bag, the same one Darlene had thrown close to his chest. Then he hugged Camden. "Just once. Just enough." "Thank you," Ezra said, "for reminding me who I am." Camden placed a hand on his shoulder. "And thank you for reminding me why I started all this." Ezra nodded once, then walked toward the terminal exit. Camden stood alone for a few seconds longer, the echo of the terminal quiet, the press behind him fading into distant voices. But he didn't feel alone. He felt grounded. He had landed, not just from a flight, but from a long journey through silence. And now, the ground beneath him was no longer heavy. It was solid, because the weight he had carried all these years wasn't his alone anymore. And that changed everything. Camden sat alone in the back seat of a black Lincoln SUV, the low hum of the road beneath him blending into the quiet hum inside his chest. City lights spilled across the windows as the vehicle glided through the heart of Los Angeles. His phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time. He didn't look at it right away. Instead, he looked at his reflection in the darkened glass. The man staring back wasn't angry. He wasn't even tired. He was awake in a way that felt foreign, alert, stripped of the armor that years in boardrooms had built around him. The driver's voice crackled gently from the front. "Sir, you need me to stop somewhere first?" Camden shook his head. "No, just take me straight to the office." The buzz came again. This time, Camden picked it up. There were 3 missed calls, all from private numbers. He recognized the last one. It was board chair Helen Braverman, a woman known more for her discreet ruthlessness than her compassion. Camden exhaled, then answered on the next ring. "Camden," she said, voice sharp and deliberate. "I assume you know what's happening." "I'm aware." "You've made the front page of 5 national outlets in under an hour. CNN's already pulled archived footage of your company acquisition back in 2018. Twitter is flooded with clips from that passenger's phone, and the airline's legal team is in full spin mode." Camden leaned back against the leather seat. "I didn't say a word on camera. You didn't need to. They got the footage. The way you picked up that bag. The pause. The look. The line about aircraft leases. Camden, it's poetry. Dangerous. Poetic justice." He didn't speak. Helen continued. "Let me be clear. I don't care about optics if you're playing chess. But are you? I didn't do it to stir the board," Camden said evenly. "I did it because it was right." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Your silence will say more than a press conference ever could. So don't speak. Not yet. Let the machine chew itself up for a while." "You're suggesting I say nothing I'm suggesting," she replied coolly. "That you let the guilty reveal themselves. No need to chase the spotlight. It's already burning them alive." Camden closed his eyes. "You ever notice," he said, "how people can fly at 30,000 feet but still sink lower than sea level?" Helen paused. "You're feeling this. That's rare for you." "I always felt it," Camden replied. "I just stopped pretending I couldn't." "Then use it," she said. "But do it on your terms." The call ended, As the SUV pulled into the underground garage of Belridge Holdings, Camden stepped out slowly, letting the concrete and shadows absorb his thoughts. His assistant, Jonas, was already waiting at the private elevator with a file in hand. Evening. Mr. Wells, we've had 53 press requests. Legal has drafted 3 possible statements. One is neutral, one slightly firm, and one, well, let's just say it's a bullet. Camden raised an eyebrow. Let's not shoot anyone tonight. Jonas, copy that. Also, there's someone in your office. Said she wouldn't leave until she saw you. Who? Jonas hesitated. Samantha Marsh. Camden's body stilled. She's Darlene's daughter, PR manager for Westlux Airlines. Camden exhaled slowly and stepped into the elevator. The doors opened onto the 38th floor, dimly lit, hushed like a chapel. At the far end, behind the glass-walled office, a woman stood facing the skyline. She turned when she heard his steps. Samantha Marsh was in her early 40s, dressed in a cream blazer with a quiet elegance that spoke of someone raised on reputation, not resilience, but her eyes weren't guarded. They were heavy. "I appreciate you seeing me," she began. Camden closed the door behind him. "I didn't say I would." She nodded. "I'm here for 2 reasons. First, to tell you I'm sorry for what my mother did, and second, to ask you not to destroy us." Camden walked past her and poured a glass of water. "I didn't set anything on fire. Ms. Marsh, you didn't have to," she said quietly. "But it's burning anyway." Camden leaned against the edge of his desk. "Your mother threw a black man's luggage into a trash bin in front of a plane full of passengers without reason. And then she lied. I know. She stared at him like he was beneath the carpet. I know that look. I've seen it my whole life." Samantha's voice cracked. "She wasn't always like this." Camden raised an eyebrow. "She was when it mattered." Silence filled the room. "She's suspended, pending investigation," Samantha offered. "That's not accountability," Camden replied, voice soft but precise. "That's delay." Samantha stepped forward, hands trembling. "You don't have to speak to the press. You have that kind of power. One word from you could sink us or give us space to fix this." Camden studied her for a long moment. Then he asked, "Do you have children?" "Yes." "2. Black." She looked startled. Then she shook her head. Then, "I need you to understand something. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a violation of humanity, of decency, of every silent scar people like me carry every time we walk into a room and wait to see who sees us as less." Her eyes shimmered with something deeper than shame. Grief. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. Camden nodded slowly. "I believe you. But this isn't about apologies. It's about repair." She handed him a folder. "Our board will meet tomorrow. We've drafted a full equity audit proposal. Oversight committee. Training reform, hiring review, you name it." Camden flipped it open. "Will your mother be present at that meeting?" "No." "Good." He closed the file. "You have until sunrise to make this real. Because by 7 a.m., this won't be a story. It'll be a movement." Samantha turned to leave. As she reached the door, she paused. "Mr. Wells, may I ask why you didn't tell them sooner that you were the owner? That they were looking at the man who could end their company with one phone call?" Camden didn't look at her. "I wanted the truth to speak first, before my title did." And with that, she left. Camden stood in the dim light, his hands gripping the folder. His shoulders no longer carried just the weight of a business. They carried the voice of everyone who had ever been silenced mid-air. The bar didn't have a name on the outside, just a bronze treble clef embedded in brick beside the weathered wooden door. It was the kind of place Camden Wells never used to visit, tucked between a laundromat and a soul food diner on Delaney Street. The place was barely wide enough to fit a grand piano, but that was part of its charm. Inside, the air was thick with saxophone and memory, dark wood floors, warm amber lights, and tables carved with initials from decades of half-forgotten lovers and loyal regulars. No one wore suits here. The patrons leaned in close to each other, voices low, laughter deeper than it was loud. It was a room built on trust and tempo. Camden slipped into a booth near the back, unnoticed except by the bartender, a soft-eyed man named Reuben, who gave him a nod and set down a glass of lemon water without a word. That was another reason Camden came here. No one asked what he did for a living. They just waited for Ezra, and Ezra was what brought him out tonight. Ezra Lane was already seated on the piano bench, long fingers hovering an inch above the keys like a prayer not yet spoken. His eyes were closed, his body perfectly still. The crowd hushed instinctively as if they all felt the moment coming. Then it began. A single chord, low, deliberate, full of weight, then another, and another, until the melody curled itself around the room like smoke from an old memory. Camden felt it in his chest first, not as sound, but as a shift, a loosening of something deep and private. Ezra played like a man who had stopped trying to impress the world and started trying to understand it instead. There was no flash, no arrogance, just emotion, bare and precise, bleeding from every note. Camden's mind drifted as the music wove through the silence. He thought about the flight, the smell of the overhead lights, the weight of the duffel bag, the way Darlene Marsh's voice had sliced through the cabin with that cool, rehearsed authority as she tossed his bag into the trash without hesitation. The audience of strangers who froze, some who watched with curiosity, some with shame, and some with silence that screamed louder than outrage ever could. He had done nothing to provoke her. No raised voice, no attitude, just existence. He blinked slowly. A gentle tension rose in his throat, thick and slow, like grief that refused to leave even after being asked. He had spent his entire adult life building walls so high and quiet that not even he could feel the wind anymore. But now they were cracked. And Ezra's music poured through the cracks like light. When the final note fell into the air, a single second passed before anyone dared breathe again. Then the applause rose, not like thunder, but like rain, soft, honest, cleansing. Ezra stood and nodded once, then stepped down, heading toward Camden's booth. He didn't speak as he slid into the seat across from him. He just sipped the water Reuben placed in front of him. Camden waited. "So," Ezra said finally, voice like sandpaper and honey. "How was your flight?" Camden exhaled. "Public?" Ezra chuckled. "That's one word for it." Camden looked at him. Really looked. "I didn't mean for it to become a headline." Ezra shrugged. "Sometimes the world just needs a mirror." "Brother. And you?" "You held one up without raising your voice." Camden fell quiet. "I kept wondering if I should have stopped it sooner. Said something before she touched the bag. Told her who I was." "Would it have mattered?" Ezra asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. But I keep thinking about that little boy in 11C. He saw it happen. He saw what it meant. I can't stop thinking about what that planted in him." Ezra leaned forward. "That it planted the truth, the kind that either wakes you up or breaks you." Camden looked down at his hands. "They're trying to control the narrative now, the airline, the board. PR. Ezra smiled faintly. You can't script truth. You can only live it. Camden was quiet. Then, his voice broke softly through the hush between them. There was a part of me that wanted to yell. Ezra nodded. But you didn't. I didn't want to become the angry black man on a flight. I wanted to stay calm, measured, professional, respectable. Ezra added gently. Camden's eyes closed. Yes, respectable. Always that word. Ezra's voice was low. They want us to be calm when we're humiliated, grateful when we're tolerated, silent when we're violated. Camden opened his eyes and looked out at the people in the bar, people who, just like him, had carried invisible weights every day. Weights made heavier by the requirement that they smile while carrying them. I didn't ask for this, Camden whispered. But maybe, Ezra said softly, it asked for you. A silence settled between them that didn't need filling. Moments later, Camden reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim black folder. He slid it across the table. Ezra raised an eyebrow. This what I think it is. It's time, Camden said, to stop being just a mirror. We build something real, permanent. Ezra flipped it open. Inside was a proposal, not for a foundation, but for an institution, a coalition of flight crews, aviation professionals, pilots, educators, and human rights leaders, dedicated to transforming the air travel industry from the inside out. No corporate fluff, no PR shielding, just accountability. Ezra smiled as he read. What do you call it? Camden looked at the piano. Altitude. Ezra laughed. That's good. Camden nodded. People need to feel like they belong at 30,000 feet, too. Ezra closed the folder. Let me guess, you already picked a date for the announcement tomorrow morning at West Lux's equity reform meeting. I'll be there, not just as a shareholder. Ezra grinned, but as the owner, Camden's voice was calm, as a passenger who deserves to be seen. They sat there for a while longer, saying nothing, just letting the room breathe around them. Reuben refilled their glasses and slipped away again like a ghost. Ezra finally stood. I'll be in the front row. Camden stood too, and I'll be on the stage. For the first time in a long time, I'll speak. Ezra clapped him on the back. Then speak loud enough to lift the whole sky. The West Lux Equity Reform Summit was always held at the Meridian, a glass-wrapped building that sat like a jewel between two rivers. Everything about it was designed to impress. Chrome fountains, white-gloved valets, walls made of stone so polished they caught your reflection in ways that made you question what you looked like versus who you were. Camden Wells walked in alone. No entourage, no press manager, no tailored smile. He wore a simple navy suit, no tie, an open collar, as if to say this wasn't a performance. This wasn't a boardroom game. This was personal, because it was. A receptionist at the front desk scanned her tablet with polite confusion. Then recognition. Mr. Wells. Of course. You're already marked as primary. She stepped from behind the desk and gestured with both arms toward the elevator. They're waiting upstairs. Camden nodded once and stepped in. The elevator was mirrored. He avoided his reflection. As it rose, floor by floor, he could feel the pressure of it all building like air before a storm. The stakes were different today. He wasn't here to negotiate funding or approve language on a contract. He was here because something sacred had been broken, and he could no longer accept that silence was his only option. When the doors opened, a sea of suits turned to look at him. There were 20 people seated in a horseshoe around the Reform Committee table. 3 on virtual screens. 4 in corners pretending not to listen, but taking notes on tablets like hawks. West Lux's CEO, Madison Crane stood. She had a smile like frost. "Camden, we weren't expecting you to arrive so early." He gave a small nod. "I figured it was time." She motioned toward an empty chair at the table. The placard already had his name on it. He didn't sit. Instead, he placed a single black folder at the center of the table. "This is called altitude," he said clearly, "and before we move on to the next quarter's diversity metrics, I'd like to tell you what it is, and what it isn't." The room stilled. A few shuffled their papers, unsure if this was a pitch or a protest. Camden continued, "Altitude is a new aviation equity coalition, created not by lawyers or marketing team, but by people who fly, who serve, who watch racism wear a uniform and still go unchallenged." He looked around the room slowly. Altitude will not be run through West Lux. It will exist beside it and above it, and if we're being honest, in some places, in spite of it. He let the silence stretch. It will include anonymous reporting systems, a new crew ombudsman structure, mental health and trauma support services for employees and passengers targeted during flights, and, most importantly, a rotating civilian ethics board with voting oversight. Someone to his right muttered under their breath, too soft to hear, but loud enough to insult. Madison's face twitched. Not a smile. Not yet. Camden reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple card. He placed it on the table beside the folder. It was a photocopy of the lease. His name, in bold, on the aircraft, the same aircraft Darlene Marsh had thrown his bag from. He tapped it once. "This happened on a plane I helped pay for." No one moved. Camden let his voice soften just slightly. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for special treatment, but I will not pretend it didn't happen. Not for your comfort, and not for mine." A woman from the compliance department spoke up. "Mr. Wells, we all agree what happened was unacceptable, but going public with internal reforms risks damaging the trust we've been building." Camden looked at her. "Trust built on invisibility isn't trust. It's obedience." The words hung in the air like exposed wires. Then a voice came from the screen in the corner. It was Director Hannah Malik, calling in from Amsterdam. "I read Altitude last night," she said calmly, "and I support it." Madison shifted. "We haven't approved any outside partnerships yet." "You won't have to," Hannah replied, "because Altitude doesn't need your permission to exist." Someone else raised their hand, then another, and another. Camden could feel the tide turning, but he didn't smile. Not yet, because he knew what was coming. Predictably, it came from the far end of the table. A man named Richard Lynn, mid-50s, old money East Coast lineage, CFO with a permanent smirk. He leaned back in his seat. "I have no issue with fair treatment," he began, "but it seems to me we're at risk of turning every single grievance into a racial incident. Sometimes, maybe a bad bag toss is just that." Camden didn't blink. He stepped toward him. "There's something you need to understand. Richard, when you've spent your whole life being followed in stores, ignored at counters, and watched like a threat on planes, there is no such thing as just a bag toss. Every microaggression becomes a needle in a cumulative wound." Richard raised both eyebrows. "You're emotional." Camden let the insult land, and then, with the calm of someone who'd been called worse by better men, he said, "No, I'm precise. And I won't be shamed into silence by men who've never had to explain their presence before being allowed to speak." For a long time, no one spoke. Then Madison sighed and folded her hands. "Camden, what do you want?" The question was simple, but it meant everything. Camden took a breath. I want you to back Altitude. I want Westlux to be the first major airline to recognize it, to co-fund it, but not control it. I want public accountability, transparent funding, and protections for whistleblowers. I want the next time a crew member throws a black passenger's bag in the trash, they think twice, not because of a fine, but because they know someone is finally watching. He stepped back. And I want every little boy in 11C to know that staying calm does not mean staying silent. That's when the silence broke. A few executives stood, some slow, some immediate, but all steady. One by one, they placed a hand on the Altitude folder, some out of belief, some out of optics. But Camden didn't care, because momentum had already chosen its side. Madison leaned forward. We'll go into executive session, but you have your answer. Mr. Wells, we will support Altitude. Camden nodded, then sat, not because he was tired, but because he had finally arrived, not at a meeting, but at his purpose. Camden did not return to his suite at the Meridian. He left the Summit building without fanfare, blending into the quiet of early evening like a shadow slipping past the city's edge. A driver waited outside, but he waved him off and began to walk. Walking had always helped him think. It helped him feel the gravity of decisions settle in his bones before the world caught up. Tonight, he didn't walk to clear his mind. He walked to find it. 20 blocks later, he found himself standing in front of an old stone chapel converted into a private arbitration center. Its doors were tall, heavy, the kind that made you feel judged even before you entered. He stepped inside and spoke quietly to the receptionist, handing her a small envelope with a pre-approved arbitration reference. She checked the record. Yes, room 4. She's already inside. He nodded once and walked down the corridor, passing closed doors and quiet conversations hushed by years of tension. When he reached room 4, he paused, took a breath, then opened the door. Darlene Marsh was sitting in a leather chair by the window. No flight uniform today, just a gray cardigan and dark jeans. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked tired, as if something inside her had crumbled quietly in the days since the flight. She stood. He did not extend a hand. She didn't either. They simply sat, an oak table between them. A mediator in the corner nodded politely and clicked the record button on a small device. This meeting, she began softly, is confidential and non-binding. Both parties are here voluntarily. No legal outcomes will result. The purpose is understanding. Understanding. The word felt heavy in the room, like it knew how many versions of itself had been faked before. The mediator gestured for them to begin. Darlene spoke first. Her voice was small, not timid, just faded. I've watched the footage 100 times. I've read the statements. I know what I did was wrong. I've issued the formal apology through the airline's protocol, but none of it means anything. I know. I want to say something that isn't rehearsed, just true. Camden remained quiet. His eyes never left her. She looked down, twisting a silver ring on her finger. When you boarded that flight, I didn't see a passenger. I saw a problem. A man sitting in a seat I didn't expect him to be in. A man who didn't explain himself, who didn't apologize for being calm. She shook her head slightly. That sounds horrible. I know, but it's the truth. My first instinct wasn't safety. It was suspicion. And that came from somewhere I should have questioned years ago. She paused. I've been flying for 19 years. I've broken up fights. I've resuscitated a man who collapsed mid-air. I've held screaming babies so exhausted mothers could sleep. I've also let bias sit in my pocket like an ID badge. Camden finally spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled. Why didn't you just ask me? She blinked. He continued. If you had said, Sir, I just need to confirm your seating assignment, I would have shown you, without hesitation, without anger. But you didn't ask. You judged. Darlene exhaled. Because I thought I already knew the answer. That's the worst part. I had written the script before you opened your mouth. She rubbed her temple. My whole life, I've been trained to spot disruptions. The problem is, no one taught me what happens when I become the disruption. When I throw a man's property away because his presence made me uncomfortable, she looked up. I wish I could undo it. Camden leaned back slightly, arms folded loosely. But you didn't come here to undo anything. No. Then why are you here? She took a long breath. I'm here because my daughter, she's 24, teaches high school. English told me she couldn't speak to me until I faced what I'd done. Not through press statements, but to you, in person. Camden studied her, and for the first time, he saw something different. Not guilt, not remorse, but fracture. A woman realizing her compass had never truly been hers. He spoke slowly. When you threw my bag in the trash, you didn't just discard my belongings. You discarded my place in that space. You declared that my quiet was suspicious, my calm, threatening. He placed his hands flat on the table. But here's what you couldn't throw away. She looked up. My right to respond without violence. My right to change the system that trained you to fear me. My right to stand on that aircraft lease and say, this belongs to me too. His voice softened, but not from forgiveness, from certainty. I don't need your apology, Darlene. I needed you to understand that you were never just one person with one bad choice. You were a mirror of a system that survives because people like you think you're being professional when you're being discriminatory. She didn't cry, but she didn't speak again. The mediator clicked off the recorder. Thank you both. The meeting ended. Camden stood and turned toward the door. But just as he reached it, Darlene said something so quiet it almost didn't make it across the space. My daughter said she's glad you exist, that someone like you finally forced this to be seen. Camden stopped. He did not look back, but he replied, I didn't do it to be seen. I did it so no one else would be erased. Then he left, out into the night, not vindicated, not comforted, but clear. Later, as he walked back into his apartment, his shoes echoing softly against the hardwood floor, he saw the envelope on his counter. It was from Ezra. Inside was a single sentence on a white note card. It read, You are not responsible for her awakening, only for not sleeping through your own. Camden sat, and for the first time in weeks, he let the silence in his apartment feel like peace rather than pressure. Tomorrow, the press would call. Tomorrow, West Lux would release its first public statement on altitude. Tomorrow, new storm clouds would gather. But tonight, Camden Wells slept, not because it was over, but because he had finally begun. The next morning arrived not with sunlight, but with sirens. Camden stood by the window of his apartment, coffee in hand, as he watched a news van park crookedly across the street. Another followed, then a third. By the time he finished his coffee, there were 7, each crew moving quickly. Cameras slung over shoulders, tripods extended with military precision. He hadn't called for them, but he wasn't surprised either. The clip from Flight 1789 had resurfaced again overnight, this time with a sharper edge. The flight attendant's face was blurred, but Camden's was not. The video was now accompanied by a title in bright red letters, CEO, or Trouble You Decide. He exhaled, not out of fear, out of exhaustion. Camden wasn't new to public scrutiny. But this felt different. The silence he had used to speak so powerfully had now been reinterpreted by others to fit their own narratives. Some saw a hero, others a threat. But few seemed interested in the full story. The door buzzed. Ezra. Camden opened it, and his friend entered with that familiar blend of grace and gravity, as if the universe had walked in wearing a scarf and carrying tea. "You didn't answer your phone," Ezra said simply, setting a paper bag on the counter. "I turned it off. I wanted silence. You got microphones instead." Camden nodded once. Ezra pulled out 2 bagels and a folded newspaper. He handed Camden the latter. The front page read, "Altitude Founder Breaks. Aviation Silence. But who does he really represent?" Below was a photo of Camden boarding the flight just seconds before the confrontation. He read the subheading aloud. "In an age where every cause needs a face, some wonder if Camden Wells is the right one." Ezra poured tea slowly into 2 mugs, not speaking until the steam stopped swirling. "You know what the truth is," he asked gently, "that I'm not the cause, that you never claimed to be." Camden walked toward the living room window. The city below pulsed with noise, activity, tension. Somewhere in that chaos, the core of his message had cracked, not lost, just diluted. He turned back toward Ezra. "Do you think I should speak?" Ezra tilted his head. "You already did, but they want a performance now. Something easier to market." Silence settled in the space between them like dust. Camden sat. He felt it again, that tight band of conflict stretching beneath his ribs. He had always believed in speaking when it mattered, not when it was convenient. But this was different. Altitude, the foundation he had built for transportation equity, was suddenly the centerpiece of every news segment, every roundtable discussion, every political spat. Donors had begun to circle like sharks. Sponsors made offers he had yet to open, and in the center of it all was his face, his calm, his silence. Camden leaned forward. "I don't want to become the mascot for suffering." Ezra watched him carefully. "You're not. You're the mirror. That's why they're so uncomfortable." That afternoon, Camden stepped into the studio of Win, one of the nation's largest daytime talk shows. The producers had been calling for days. Finally, after much thought, he had agreed, but only on one condition: no scripts, no pre-approval, just truth. The stage lights were bright. The host, Nina Valdez, was known for her surgical interviews. Sharp, but fair. Her intro played on the screen above. She spoke into the camera. In a time of reckoning, who gets to sit in seat 2A is no longer just about class. It's about color, context, and courage. Today, we speak with Camden Wells. Applause. He walked out. The lights warmed his shoulders. The audience was polite, curious, slightly breathless. He sat. Nina smiled politely. "Camden, thank you for joining us. I want to begin with a simple question." He nodded once. "Why didn't you say anything when it happened?" He took a breath. "Because this moment mattered. I've found that silence, when chosen with purpose, speaks louder than anger. If I had shouted, the story would have been about my tone. If I had begged, it would have been about my desperation. But when I said nothing, all that remained was the truth of her actions." The audience shifted. Nina leaned forward. And what truth was that? That presence should not have to come with proof. There was a pause, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. Nina continued, "Some are calling you the new face of equity in aviation. Others say you're overreacting, that it was a misunderstanding. How do you respond?" Camden's expression remained calm. "Equity isn't a misunderstanding. It's either present or it isn't. The moment she threw my belongings in the trash without asking my name, the issue stopped being about the bag. It became about assumption, access, and audacity. A single clap in the audience, then more." Nina's eyes softened. "You've created something powerful with altitude, but power invites pressure. Will you let this foundation go corporate? Let it become another glossy brand?" Camden didn't hesitate. "No. If it becomes performative, it dies. This wasn't built for commercials. It was built for confrontation of injustice, of silence, of systems designed to erase." Another pause. Then Nina asked the one question that had been circling social media all week. "Did you ever receive a real apology?" Camden looked straight at the camera. "Not one that changed the system. That was the moment that would be clipped. The one that would go viral." That night, the video received 9 million views in 4 hours. And yet, Camden didn't watch it. He was back at the apartment, sitting on the floor, organizing documents for a new initiative, Flight Seat Freedom. The goal was simple: anonymous reporting, standardized accountability, mandatory retraining based on pattern behavior, not just viral moments. He wasn't interested in being a symbol. He was building a structure. Across the country, airports began circulating memos. Cabin crew whisper chains lit up. Conversations started happening behind closed doors. But something else began too. Stories. People came forward. Black men, brown women, elderly passengers, immigrants, all with tales of being moved, questioned, silenced, rebooked, or removed entirely without cause. Camden became not their savior, but their signal. Altitude wasn't a spotlight. It was a switch. And suddenly, more lights were coming on. 3 weeks after the Wynn interview, Camden sat in a dark conference room inside the Altitude Foundation's new headquarters in Portland, Oregon. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. It was their first official space, paid for by private donors who believed not in Camden's fame, but in his quiet resolve. Rain tapped lightly against the windows as the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life. A simulated boarding scenario played out in front of them. The avatars were crude, computer-generated figures with just enough detail to resemble a real aircraft cabin, but it was not the visuals that mattered. It was the behavior. The simulation was designed to run thousands of micro-interactions, seat reassignments, boarding assistance, conflict resolution, luggage handling, escalation prevention. It was the cornerstone of the Flight Seat Freedom Initiative, an internal training and accountability program that could predict potential bias points based on employee history and prior behavioral data. It was artificial intelligence trained not just on efficiency, but on dignity. Camden watched in silence as one scenario triggered a familiar reaction. The avatar, labeled Passenger A, a tall black man in a gray suit, was told by the flight attendant to move to the back, even though his seat was correct. The system flagged it instantly. Behavioral pattern detected. Level 2 escalation. Beside Camden sat Lily Tsai, the program's lead architect. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, glasses slipping down her nose, eyes fixed on the data overlay. "Same cluster," she murmured. Camden nodded. Cluster 9. High probability of assumption-based rerouting. They had identified 6 behavioral clusters among staff across 25 airlines. Cluster 9 was the most dangerous. It involved consistent microaggressions that never made headlines but formed a web of daily harm. Camden leaned forward. "Run the overlay again, but focus on reaction time. Lily typed rapidly. The simulation replayed. This time. Camden noticed the delay between the moment the black passenger spoke and the attendant's decision to escalate. 7 seconds. That was all it took. 7 seconds to choose disrespect over verification. Ezra entered the room quietly, holding 2 coffees. He handed one to Camden and sat in the back without saying a word. He didn't need to. He felt it, the weight of what they were building. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Thunder rolled distantly. Lily cleared her throat. There's something else. She pulled up a report. One of the airline partners who agreed to test our system last week sent a formal letter of withdrawal this morning, cited public reputation concerns and staff discomfort. Camden didn't blink. Which airline? Skybridge? He breathed in slowly. Skybridge had been one of the first to sign on. Their CEO had called Camden personally after the incident on Flight 1789, offering cooperation, praise, and even a seat on their advisory board. It hadn't lasted. Ezra spoke from the back. They wanted the shine, not the structure. Camden didn't reply. He was staring at the simulation again, at the way the system caught the bias, and still, somehow, the airlines chose comfort over confrontation. He felt the tightness return in his chest. Not anger, responsibility. He knew this was coming. Change didn't scare people. Accountability did. Lily hesitated, then added one more thing. They leaked a draft memo to the press, claimed the simulation unfairly targets white flight attendants and creates a hostile training environment. Ezra scoffed. Hostile was a child being kicked off a flight for crying. Hostile was a woman forced to check her insulin bag while a passenger with 3 handbags walked past untouched. Camden closed his eyes. A storm was coming, and it wasn't the weather. By nightfall, the headlines had shifted. Online opinion fractured. Hashtags that once stood beside Altitude's mission now split in 2. Fly Free became bias in disguise. Former allies called for audits. Anonymous staffers wrote op-eds. They accused the system of reverse discrimination, of coding in shame and guilt. Camden received 12 interview requests in one day. He declined them all. Instead, he walked to the edge of the city park and sat on a wet bench under a wide cedar tree. Umbrella closed at his side. The ground beneath him smelled of moss and something older, more stubborn. Memories. His father used to say the most dangerous storms were the ones that didn't start with thunder, but with silence. He thought about the pilot who had never looked him in the eye, about the woman who had apologized to everyone but him, about the boy he'd seen last week at the airport, gripping his father's hand tightly as they were pulled aside for a random bag check. No camera had captured that moment. No simulation could fully model that humiliation. It was lived. Ezra joined him, sitting without a word. They stayed like that for a long while. Eventually, Camden spoke. I don't want to lose the mission in the noise. You won't. It's starting to become about everything else, about people's comfort zones, about headlines and backlash and politics. But the story began with a simple truth, that some people board the world with a heavier carry-on, and they are asked to prove they belong in every seat they've already paid for. Ezra exhaled. That truth hasn't changed, but maybe now they're finally forced to see it. Back at the foundation, Lily stayed late, alone in the lab. She ran the simulation again, but this time she changed the avatar. Passenger A was now a little girl with vitiligo. The system flagged the exact same cluster, same delay, same dismissal, same rerouting. She sat back in her chair and whispered into the room, "It's not the avatar, it's the algorithm we're trying to rewrite in people." She saved the file under a new name. Then she turned off the lights, The next day, Camden received a call, not from the airlines, but from the Department of Transportation. They had seen the simulation, and they weren't calling to shut it down. They were calling to test it nationwide. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Dulles International Terminal, casting soft golden light across the glass as Camden Wells stepped off the tram and headed toward Gate 17A. The airport was busy but quiet in the way only early morning flights could be. People moved with purpose, half asleep, clutching coffee cups and carry-ons. Camden wore no tie, just a gray sweater, worn jeans, and his weathered leather briefcase over one shoulder. He had not planned to travel today, but he received a message late the night before from a government official he once mentored. "We need you at the hearing. Tomorrow." They're voting on whether the Flight Seat Freedom Initiative would become a federal requirement for all domestic airlines. He could have sent a written statement. He could have video called in from the comfort of his office in Portland. But some things required your physical presence. Some truths carried more weight when spoken by someone who had sat in every kind of seat and been judged each time. At Gate 17A, Camden noticed a woman helping her father with a wheelchair. The agent gave them a quick nod, asked the father to wait while she tagged the chair, then proceeded to call for a pre-boarding. Group 1 only. No mention of assistance, no boarding for children, no early access for medical needs. Camden walked forward. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you allowing those with mobility needs to board early?" The agent, flustered, glanced at the screen. "Oh, I was going to call them next." Camden said nothing. He simply stepped back and watched. The old man had already started moving on his own, arms shaking, trying to follow his daughter down the jet bridge. It was subtle. It always was. Not hostility. Just omission. A forgetting that revealed more than intention. He turned away and headed toward the window. From where he stood, he could see his aircraft being fueled. A Boeing 737 leased through a partnership program he had helped create 3 years earlier. His name was still on the digital paperwork. Not for ego, for access, for this moment. He boarded last, his assigned seat in 3C, business class, a quiet aisle seat with just enough legroom. As he stowed his briefcase, a small child across the aisle waved at him. Her fingers were sticky from a lollipop. Her mother apologized quickly. Camden smiled. "It's okay. Life is sticky sometimes." The flight attendant who approached did not recognize him. She wore the usual Navy uniform and a too-tight ponytail that looked like it had been redone mid-shift. She stopped beside him, frowning at the overhead bin. "Sir, is that your bag?" "Yes. Can I see your boarding pass again?" "We may need to move you back." "Why?" "We had a seating change, an upgrade request." Camden held her gaze. He knew the look, the unspoken weight behind it. She hadn't looked at anyone else's bag, just his. He reached slowly into his coat pocket and retrieved his phone, pulled up the aircraft lease agreement, tapped to zoom, showed her the line with his name, Camden Wells, co-owner. She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Camden said softly, "I'll be keeping the seat I paid for." "Of course." "I'm sorry." She backed away, not a word of explanation, not to him, not to the other passenger, who had begun walking up the aisle, expecting an empty seat. The man looked around, confused, then turned and returned to coach. Camden leaned his head back and closed his eyes. 3 rows behind him, someone whispered, "That's the guy from the news," but no one said anything else. The plane took off, above the clouds, in that strange stillness only altitude can offer. Camden let himself think, not about the simulation, not about the backlash or the legal language in the legislation. He thought about his mother, about how she had always saved her best dress for church but never bought a suitcase, about how she believed in carrying her worth in her posture, not her luggage. He thought about being 12 years old and told to step aside at the gate while his white friend boarded first, about how he had laughed it off then, about how it never really left him. After landing, a government car waited for him on the tarmac. He was escorted to Capitol Hall through a side entrance. No cameras, no press. Inside the chamber, the senators sat in tall-backed chairs, papers spread before them. The walls smelled of mahogany and old air. Camden stood at the podium with only his voice. He did not speak for long. He did not raise his voice or ask for pity. He spoke of numbers, of how nearly 37% of reported in-flight bias cases went unresolved, of how bias was most dangerous when embedded in policy, not people. And then he spoke of the child at the window seat, the one who had waved at him. She deserves to grow up in a world where no one questions why she sits in 3A, not because of her name, or her skin, or the address on her passport, but because she belongs, because she paid, because she is here. He ended with silence, the kind that lingers. When the vote was called, the bill passed. Barely. But it passed. Outside the chamber, a young intern approached him nervously. "Mr. Wells, my mother flew with you once. She said you were the calmest person on the plane." Camden smiled. "Then tell her she helped me become the calmest person in the room." He walked out into the cold light of day. The world had not changed overnight, but it had shifted. A little. At gate 17A, 2 weeks later, a different flight attendant greeted a passenger named Marcus Dean with a smile. She did not ask him to move. She asked if he needed help placing his bag. He declined. She nodded and walked away. Unremarkable, just how it should be. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that refuses to shout. Camden Wells didn't demand revenge. He didn't sue. He didn't scream. He simply let the truth rise one act, one document, one quiet stand at a time. And in doing so, he reminded us that discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the seat you're denied, the glance you're given, the name they skip when reading upgrades aloud. But it's also in how we respond, with dignity, with courage, with presence. His silence became a movement, his restraint, a ripple, his memory, a lesson. And now, thanks to him, no child will ever have to wonder if their skin color means they board last. No mother will have to explain why Daddy was asked to move seats, and no man will have to carry his worth like baggage that's too heavy for the overhead bin. If this story moved you, let it move others too. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that don't just entertain, but change something inside us. Because next time, the story might be yours, and we'll be here ready to tell it.